I'm a very optimistic person by nature, and I'm a fan of Nebraska, so I get frustrated when Nebraska fans get so down and out, and they just think, no, I'm not going to get hyped up with Dave's off-season championships that he wants to throw out every single day, right? I enjoy that stuff. I get it. I'm a realist. I understand the mission at hand, but gosh, have fun with it. Why else would you want to be a fan of a team that you don't enjoy following? So, I mean, every season's going to be a challenge. Every football team has its ups and downs, but get behind your team and enjoy, your team you like following, and stop complaining.
Welcome to the Fan Forum, the show where we learn more about Husker Nation one fan at a time by asking them the same 4 questions. Tonight, we're joined by Jim in Minnesota. He's a biased realist full of sarcasm with some occasional interesting and righteous tweets. You can find him on Twitter at HuskersMN. Welcome to the Fan Forum, Jim.
Hey, it's great to be here, Honke. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you, man?
Just living the dream. Been a while to find my Husker quarter zip, but dug it out for the show and ready to go, man. I'm excited about this.
Yeah, I've got my rule shirt they were handing out at the opening day presser. I love the idea of your Twitter description. You're a biased realist, and on the Redcast, we call our show Husker Realism with an optimistic spin. Kind of the same thing. It's the idea that you don't have to corner yourself as one or the other. You can be a little bit of both. The most interesting fans I talk to are the ones that have a little bit of both in them, right? If you're just nonstop optimism and nothing's wrong, that's usually gets a little boring. If you're somebody that's just complaining about everything and that the realist that way, that's the same way too. I kind of like it when you can see things a little bit both ways, and we've always had a lot of good conversations that way.
Absolutely. Yeah, without a doubt. I think the last 10 years especially, I think if we've learned anything, there's another voice out there that doesn't have the same opinion all the time as we do. And I think listening to those other people's voices and, figuring out, hey, is everything that I'm thinking exactly spot on, or is it things that we should probably think about as well? And I think I've learned that the hard way, especially the last 5 years. But I hopefully some good news is on the horizon here with Will in charge. So I'm
absolutely.
Sure we'll get into it.
Well, I have someone else that I'm going to be talking with next week that also is one of those, I think, optimistic realists. And I'm looking forward to this next Wednesday, January 25th at 9 p.m. Central Standard Time. We'll have Chaz in SoCal, lifelong Husker learner. Never be afraid to look foolish in the pursuit of learning is on his Twitter account there. And also, we want to promote tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Redcast Rob will be having on Vincent Carroll Jackson, Husker D-line commit. 6'5", 270 from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So that'll be a lot of fun. Redcasters, when you're watching that, watch this live, have questions and comments and stuff ready for Redcast Rob and ready for Vincent. Great opportunity to hear from somebody who has been recruited by this new staff and has now had a chance to probably start to learn a little bit about what we're going to do on schematically and work with the coaches. So that will be a lot of fun there, and it's great to always get a Husker on it. But tonight, this isn't about that. This is about Jim. And what I love about the Fan Forum, it really is that the guest is the star. And we want to learn about as many fans from all across Husker Nations, young and old, men, women, doesn't matter who you are. We want to learn about it. And we do it by asking the same 4 questions. Why are you a Husker fan? What is your favorite Husker fan memory? Who are your all-time favorite Huskers? And then how do you think the Huskers will do next year? And I'm really looking forward to having that conversation with Jim here towards the end. But before we get to those questions, Jim, first off, just for the Redcasters, the Fan Forumers that are new to you, tell us a little bit about you. Give us your background.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in California. Lived there for about 37 years. Grew up listening to Husker games on the radio. Actually, the fans would pay to have the radio games broadcasted out in California. So was there for, again, 37 years, moved to Minnesota in 2014, and I've been in this cold, frigid, beautiful North Midwest state here. I'm a health and safety manager for a manufacturing company close by where I live here in Southeast Minnesota, and have a view of Wisconsin from our from our front door here. So I
very nice.
look across and see the enemy here every day, which is interesting. But no, we really enjoy living in Minnesota, and I enjoy the Twitter page that I do, and enjoy the interaction with the fans, and being on with you. This is, I think, my 4th time on your show, so I really appreciate you having me on and talking some Nebraska football.
Well, I can't wait. Again, question 4, when we talk about next year, it starts in Minnesota, and
That's right.
we may talk about a certain coach up there. I know that you're
favorite
really fond
coach.
of.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
I love my coach, PJ.
Well, let's get to question number 1, and that's, why are you a Husker fan?
Yeah, so growing up, my mom is actually from Nebraska, so there's the connection to Nebraska, and I grew up coming back to Nebraska for vacations and Christmas and whatnot. I remember as a kid, just I think it was a bowl game. It must have been early '80s. Must have been Rozier, I think, was the player, and a lot of excitement in the living room, and the grandparents and the aunt, the uncles, and they were all gathered around, and I loved the little red ends on the helmets. And I remember as a kid thinking that was really cool. And then obviously the excitement of the family being, completely invested in this football team. And again, growing up in California, I didn't have that team close by, but just seeing the family being there, and it was an instant kind of attraction for me, and really took off from there. And like I said, listened to every game on the radio, and then I had a chance to go to school there briefly in the 90s. But yeah, I think more just a family. Like, I think a lot of Nebraska fans, same thing. You grew up in kind of that atmosphere, and just being around it, and seeing seeing just the passion from the entire family, and knowing it was special, and knowing how much it meant to them, and I wanted to be part of that energy. I mean, I remember there's just that small TV in the living room, and everyone was just totally invested in it. It was fun. So that's how it started.
And it was your mom. Your mom grew up in Nebraska.
Mom grew up in Bellevue. So Bellevue is, and then she, we go back there. See my grandparents and aunts and uncles. Everybody else was still there. So, and then my siblings still live in Omaha and Bellevue. So my parents as well. So it's a 6-hour drive from here, which is nice.
You said, early 80s. So you grew up in that regard, very similar time frame as me. My first year that I remember everything was 83.
Okay.
So the scoring explosion, triplets with Rozier and Fryer and Gill. It's an interesting time because Nebraska was so good at that point, top 10 consistently. And also, like, there wasn't a lot of televised football at that point yet. And so Nebraska would get 2 or 3 national games a year. And so you could be living out in California and seeing us as often as you would see probably a California team, most likely. So it's interesting how that kind of played out. But those formative years for both you and I at that time, we were pretty good.
Yeah. There was a lot of bowl games, and there was a stretch, I think, as we got older, I think we're about the same age, where they weren't winning bowl games, and it almost became a time where you almost dreaded that bowl game and the narrative around Osborne and not being able to win. And I told a friend of mine who's not a Nebraska fan, kind of what we went through. That the high school, college years, I'm talking, early 90s, mid 90s, and just the frustration around, can he actually do this? Can he actually, beat a good team? And I kind of dreaded the bowl games because we're going to lose to a Florida team. I kind of knew it. And to get over that hump finally was special. But those 6 years there where we couldn't win, in the after the season was kind of tough. It was kind of embarrassing a little bit. It was like, gosh, we can't get through.
7 straight bowl losses, but
was it 7? Okay.
Yeah, it was 7. But to your point, you're playing down in Florida, and you're losing to Florida teams. You're playing Miami in their home.
Yeah.
If we don't play Miami, if we don't play in the Orange Bowl, then one year we got the reprieve, and we got sent up to the Citrus Bowl to play Georgia Tech and the greatest team they'd ever had. So we were constant. This is still kind of, it irks me to this day because I see the SEC doing some of this. When a team doesn't ever have to leave their home confines or doesn't have to travel much more than a couple hours, it's an extra advantage. And in those 80s, we were either playing Miami in Miami or we were playing LSU in the Sugar Bowl. And, those are frustrating things that now that we're getting into a playoff era where you can actually host a game, have teams host them. Like, as much as I dislike Fleck, if Minnesota ever could host a game in December against Alabama or something, I would just love it. I would just love anything where we get a Southern team having come up north to play in conditions like, that we get to see. something that can be a bit of a neutralizer. But because we've always gone the other way, all of us northern teams, we always are going south and
True.
playing them in their home.
I mean, you think about it, like if, it'd be like, when we beat Miami in '94, I mean, we were playing in their stadium, and we don't really think about playing a game in Memorial Stadium for the next championship. Like, how weird would that be to have, whoever come and play us in Memorial Stadium for the title? It'd be crazy. And that's what we did. We beat them. I remember the controversy about having the smoke. Do you remember that they used to have that smoke machine when they would come out of the tunnel? The Hurricanes did. And I think it was Osborne said, hey, this shouldn't be like a home game for them, and they shouldn't have. Now, why can they have the smoke? This is a bowl game. And I thought, yeah, he's right. They should. It's not their home. I mean, it is, but it's like their home stadium, but it's not. It's weird. It's just, you're right. It's a weird time to be playing games in their home stadium. What an advantage.
Rob asked there, what do you think the score would have been if the championship game was played in Texas? And I assume, Rob, you're referring to the Orange Bowl that we're talking about with like Miami. When you're playing down there, that was the great thing about that 95 Orange Bowl was that nobody was going to say that we didn't deserve it. I know we couldn't play Penn State. And of all the seasons where I actually feel for whoever the opponent was that didn't get a chance, I feel for Penn State there. They went undefeated. Sure. They didn't get a chance to play us. That was the rules of the time. I get it. I've never felt that way for Michigan 3 years later. They should have been playing us. They were in a conference that chose to play in the Rose Bowl over the Bowl Alliance. And because in '94, we had to play in the Orange Bowl. We were the Big 8 champs. In 1995, we were the Big 8 champs, but with the Bowl Alliance, we no longer had to play in the Orange Bowl. We could play in the Fiesta Bowl. Florida no longer had to play in the Sugar Bowl. They could play in the Fiesta Bowl. The Bowl Alliance fixed all the issues, except for the Big Ten and the Pac-10. Those two decided they wanted the Rose Bowl was more important to them than being a part of the Bowl Alliance. And so
I didn't know that.
So that's why everything worked out okay in 95 and 96. And then in 97, we run into the same issue. So the argument anytime, and this always gets lost on Twitter, I get into an argument with someone on this and the point gets lost, but who would have won, Michigan or Nebraska? It doesn't matter. What upsets me is that game should have been played. And the reason it didn't get played was not Nebraska's fault. Nebraska joined the alliance that would have made that game be played, and the other conference now that we're in. And by the way, that Rose Bowl doesn't look as shiny anymore. Now for all the work of wanting to keep the Rose Bowl above the fray, now that we're pulling in USC and UCLA, that Rose Bowl has a different look and meaning.
Bad.
It is.
I mean, I love the Rose Bowl. I think that's the best venue in all of sports. I mean, I went to several games there. Obviously, grew up not too far from there, and I always tell people it looks better, and it looks amazing on TV to be there in that Rose Bowl. It's amazing, and I love having that bowl mean something. I remember growing up as a kid watching the Rose Bowls, and I mean, I wasn't a fan of the Big Ten or the Pac-12, obviously, but just that pageantry around the bowl game there was awesome. So I'll kind of miss that, even as a go ahead.
Well, the beauty is the venue still is amazing. I mean, I 100% agree that the Rose Bowl is amazing. It doesn't have to be just for two conferences. And that's the thing that maybe gets lost in some of those conversations is like when I tell some Big Ten guy that I don't care about the Rose Bowl the way that they do, like if I look at the Wisconsin's side of their stadium, it talks about the Rose Bowls they've made the way that we talk about the national championships. I don't care about the Rose Bowl like that because to me, the Orange Bowl was my bowl game growing up. I mean, if I had an affection one bowl game, it would have been the Rose Bowl, or the Orange Bowl. I'm sorry, but now that building's been torn down and we've moved on and we're into this era. Now, what I want to do is I want Nebraska. I want the conference I'm part of to be playing for meaningful title games and getting into playoffs and ultimately I want to see SEC teams more than anything have to get out of their comfort zone every once in a while. And the only way that we can do that right now is you got to get into the playoff and get them to come up here and play North.
We'll see. It should be fun.
Well, let's get to question number 2 here. What is your favorite Husker fan memory?
Yeah, so I'm going to put aside the national championships for a second. I think everyone's memory of the Fiesta Bowl and the Orange Bowl were awesome. But if I could put those aside and pick another game that was awesome, to me it was the 09 Holiday Bowl. And this is a picture of my wife and I. And this is this is a couple Californians dressed like they're in Minnesota winter, but it was a very frigid 68 degrees that day, and it was Dominican Sue's last game, and if you remember, this was against Arizona, and we were shutting them out, and it was just a fun game, and we were in control. Nick Foles couldn't do anything against our defense, and then at the end of the game, if you recall, we were trying to keep them below 100 yards total offense, and we had pulled we pulled the starters out, and they started to march down towards the end zone, and Bo put the starters back in to try to keep it under 100 yards, and the crowd was just going nuts, and it was fun to see, after the painful loss to Texas, and having to watch that, that shell of an offense for how many games that was after the Iowa State loss when we had the 17 turnovers or whatever it was in that game, and Bo shut it down. But to see him open it back up in the bowl game and run zone read and run Zach Lee with quarterback keeper, and it was like, where was this offense? But the Niles Paul explosion, and it was a fun night, and to be there with Husker fans from outside the country. My wife's been to 3 games of her entire life, and that was probably the funnest time she had. So that's my best memory as a Husker fan.
Well, that's
going to actual game. Yeah,
that's a great memory.
So here's the funny part. Here's the funny part too, is when we were walking out of the stadium, it's just funny. If you recall, so they're given this, and the trophy's a big giant whale. Like the Holiday Bowl is, I forget the sponsor, Pacific Life, yeah. And they give this giant whale to Bo, and I'm walking out, and he's like, and we're going to be 10 times better on defense next year. I turn to my wife, I'm like, that is not true. There's no way. They're losing to Dominican Sue, Prince of Mukamara, and Philip Dillard, and I'm like, what is he talking about? And it killed my high. Like I was thinking Bo's going to be awesome. This is going to be amazing. Like, this is the guy. And he said that, and I was like, this guy, that's not. Yeah, I got the car kind of pissed off. I'm like, what are you talking about? 10 times better?
There's, that's the biased realist right there, right?
It is, yeah.
You're happy as hell about the win, but come on, seriously, like that defense, that's a national championship defense. That defense, to go 10-4 with that team is almost a shame, because that defense was so amazing. And I was at that Texas game. So we're tailgating at Jerry World during the day, and some Texas fan, real arrogant one, was tailgating with us and comes up, oh, Nebraska, we're going to beat you guys, 50 to 25 or something like that, he said. And I'm like, dude, you guys very well may beat us. Don't get me wrong. You may beat us, but you're not scoring 55 on us, and we're not scoring 25 on you either, by the way. Yeah. Our offense is terrible, and our defense is going to, probably hold you guys to 15, and that still may not be enough for us to win it, right? I mean, that season, to have such contrast of what an unbelievably dominant defense, and to just have probably the most unserviceable offense. And it didn't make sense, because it wasn't a talentless offense. You have Roy Halou and Burkhead, and you have Niles Paul, and Spencer Long, I think, was on the line, and 2 quarterbacks that were 4-star quarterbacks, Cody Green and Zach Lee, but just nothing ever came together, it felt like.
Well, that was the frustrating thing, is like and then I remember the discussion before the bowl game, and there was talk of, I think it was who was our OC? Sean
Watson.
Sean Watson. He was talking to recruits about how they're going to open it up and watch us open. I'm like, why couldn't you open it up against Texas? Like, where was this? And they were running the zone read, and Zach Lee was running wild, and you're happy, but at the same time, it's frustrating. It's kind of like, a little bit kind of like what what's happened, with Iowa the last 2 years, where it's like, you can see there's options available to them to do some things. And it's like, obviously not that I'm an Iowa fan, but it's like, why don't you do what's in front of you? And in that bowl game, they did it. They did everything that you would hope they'd do throughout the year. Throw deep to Niles Paul. I mean, Niles Paul was a phenomenal receiver. Let him get deep, use the speed. Rex Burkhead in the Wildcat, that was his first Wildcat game, where he had a tremendous game. And it was fun, but it was like, gosh, if we had used this, it could have beat Texas. It could have, beat Iowa State for sure. I mean, it was weird, but it was a fun culmination to, like you said, the most dominant defense that we have ever seen in our lifetimes at Nebraska for sure. So yeah. And what's funny is about that game, Sue's last game was that it was the last game. Mm-hmm. He didn't really have any, like, he was kind of vacant in that game. He didn't have any sacks. He didn't have any pressures. It was
Mm.
kind of like his last hurrah was the Texas game, but they still dominated Arizona. But
I've never seen a more individually dominant defensive game than that Texas game with
without a doubt,
Sue.
yeah.
I mean, that's, I think there might be some team defenses that we had, 94, 95, and there, 97. There were some great defenses we had that, or I don't know if they're better, but at least they're on par. That 09 defense was unbelievable, and Sue was unbelievable. But individually, man, Sue just changed the whole game. I mean, he could two gap anybody. There was a stretch early in the season, 3 or 4 games in, where he was listed in the top. He was ranked in like the top 30 of pass breakups. He was the only non-defensive
Crazy.
back, as he was also in the top 10 on sacks and top 10 on QB hurries. And my goodness, he just, what couldn't he do? And then you'd see his stats. I think Brett Ciancia of Pick Six Previews likes to post this every once in a while, but it was the final stats in 2009 of Sue against the defensive line of Florida, Alabama, and like one other school, Texas, maybe it was. And Sue's stats almost across the board are better than the entire defensive lines of those schools. That dude was just insane. I mean, that was fun. And maybe something we can get to in a little bit as we talk about this next season is how sometimes when you make a coaching change, how new coaches, new strength and conditioning concepts, new eyes on a player, how that can change how things look. Because some of those same defensive players that were on that unbelievable, incredible 09 defense were some of the same players that were on that 07 defense that at the very end of Callahan's era, we're losing 60-something to 50-something to Colorado with a lot of those guys, Dillard and Sue, playing, some significant snaps there. So who knows? Who knows? We're not making that prediction yet, and we'll get to there in question 4. But let's get to question 3 first. Who are your all-time favorite Huskers, Jim?
So my all-time favorite Husker is going back to these bowl games we kept losing, and there was one Husker that was always making plays, always going up against the Florida State receivers and Miami receivers and just making plays. And for pound, he was the most bad, I'm going to say bad A Husker, and that's Baron Miles. I mean, Baron Miles was a phenomenal player. And he had that special talent. Not only was he, an amazing cornerback, but he could block punts. And his ability to change games with block punts, and he's just fearless. I mean, he was the guy, making plays against Kansas State, against Chad May, when you had to, time and time again. I remember just hearing, and Baron Miles, and to see him play for the first time, you're like, that's Baron Miles. Like, he's just this tiny little guy. And so I took an affinity to Baron Miles, and definitely enjoyed watching him as a youngster.
Well, I can't wait to ask this question a week from now to Chaz in SoCal, because last week when I asked Shelby it, her answer was Baron Miles. So, is there a chance I've had back-to-back Baron Miles?
Back-to-back.
Could we have back-to-back? We have a three-peat of them, because I agree with you 100%. And I'm going to sound like a broken record from last week, but what he did, he held in 93, he held J.J. Stokes of UCLA to one of only 2 games where he didn't score a touchdown. And Stokes was a big 6'5", 6'6" receiver, and Miles, as always, is giving up 7, 8, 9 inches, but he had a 40-plus inch vertical.
Insane vertical.
Oh, insane! And against Miami, same thing. There was like Chris T. Jones and a couple of other receivers they had that were 6'4", and he's going. Yep. He was going 1-on-1 against all those guys. And I always remember the Thursday night Oklahoma State game that was on ESPN, where he took the punt off the foot of the Oklahoma State punter for a touchdown. Right. And it's, he was kind of the predecessor. Then we had Terrell Farley after that for a couple of years, and he was that way on special teams. But you mentioned Iowa earlier this last season, and Iowa this last year, I mean, they would have unbelievable special teams, and it was whether they were blocking punts or they would, they win games with great defense and great special teams. And Nebraska back then, there were a number of games like that too, where you make the big special teams play, and Osborne had such appreciation for it. I would challenge any Husker fan, if you haven't, go to YouTube after you, of course, you watch this, go to YouTube and watch the 96 Nebraska K-State game. It's the game 4 of the season. We already lost to Arizona State. Our offense was struggling. It was still the first year of Frost, and we were just kind of getting our feet under us. And you go out to Manhattan to play a top 20 K-State team, and that's the year they're really going to beat us now. They're going to beat us in 1996. And our offense struggled. But we made 4 field goals in the first half, including like a 50-some yarder from Chris Brown at the end of the half, blocked two punts. 2 punts. One of them was Terrell Farley, and defensively just destroyed them. And we looked ugly. Like, you would watch that game and you'd think maybe it's a tie, and we were up like 19-3 at half and won the game 31-3, and we did not look impressive at all. But it was just, you played great special teams, great defense, and the offense, it kind of let the offense finally get things figured out. And by the end of that year, the offense was doing pretty well by the time they got to the Orange Bowl and played Virginia Tech. But it took a while. Those other 2 areas of the team, defense and special teams, are so important. And players like Miles, players like Farley, all those guys, they made a huge difference. Well,
absolutely.
This is it. I mean, I didn't want to rush us through the first 3 questions, Jim, but I knew I wanted to give us as much time, and there is no time limit here. Question number 4. How do you think the Huskers will do this year? It's a loaded question.
Yeah.
It's a loaded question. There's nuances. How do we want to break this down? I'll let you kind of start. How do we want to start to break down what's going to happen?
We were talking before the show started, and obviously, and there's those first 2 games are so interesting, right? There's a pressure-packed games, or you have a league game. I think it's an opponent who's beat you the last 3 years in a row.
Mm-hmm.
Or is it 4?
4 years. Yeah, we only beat them the
4 years
first
in a
year.
row. Yeah, so out of the gates, you have that, and then we go into Colorado, and I think we can get to a bowl game next year. I think that's my expectation, that they do that. I think the schedule, aside from the rough start out of the gates without really having a nice, easy layup, aside from that, I think the schedule is pretty good. And I think that if you're Rule, you look at the schedule and go, yeah, we can definitely work with this. And we'll see. I don't know. I mean, I don't know who's going to play quarterback. There's so many questions we don't have answers to. And I guess the hard part is you can kind of look at these pieces and look at their history and start to think about how they can piece this together. On defense, they're adding a ton of pieces. I had somebody ask me, what do you think they're going to do with so-and-so? I'm like, I have no idea. I don't know if Sherman's going to be an edge, or if he's going to be like an inside linebacker that's going to be 250 pounds. I just don't know. And that's the fun part, right? Is kind of seeing how these things work out. And we'll maybe know some more in the spring and, watch the spring game and kind of get an idea of what they're trying to do. But it's a lot of intrigue there, and there's a lot of curiosity of what's going to happen. But I think getting a bowl game 12-0. I don't know if I'm going to say that, but I'll say this: they're not going to do. You look at Rule's past and look at his season one, both at Temple and at Baylor. I think he won 1 game at Baylor, and I think was it similar at Temple, 1 or 2 games there as well.
2 games maybe at Temple for sure.
He's going to do much better than that. He's got pieces. I mean, this team we saw this last year. Obviously, we only won 4 games. We saw them beat Iowa. We saw they have talent, and so I think you add the pieces they're adding in, and I think you add an adult in the room with Rule and the staff he's put together, and I expect that they'll get to a bowl game. That's my view right now in January at least. But we'll see as this thing materializes.
The motto, I'm gonna beat this horse here over the course of the offseason. For me, it's the race to 6, and I'm not saying the ceiling is 6. I don't put ceilings on Nebraska, but the race to 6 means I think it's important in year 1 of Rule, because I think he's an experienced coach, and I think he's a good hire and a good fit here. I also think it's important, a tangible sign of progress, because we've talked about progress so long on this show, but it never turns into wins. A tangible sign of progress is 6 wins getting to a bowl game. So the race to 6, in my mind, works like, hey, we could be 6-0 in week 6, right? We could do almost essentially what Lance Leipold did and be 5-1 at 6 games. We could conceivably.
Yeah.
And then Leipold turned around, went 1-5 the last 6 games. That could happen too. Who knows? But you still get to 6, you get to the bowl game. So whether it takes us 6 weeks or it's 12 weeks, we're sitting at 5-6 with Iowa coming to town, and we need to win it to get to a bowl. Whatever it is, I think we got it. I really believe we got to get to that bowl game next year to show a good early sign that this is working. We shouldn't start off 0-6 again like we did in the first year of Frost, despite there's going to be crazy things that happen and weird things, and you got to be able to adapt. But if you can play good special teams, if you can play good defense, you're going to win some early games. We talked about Frost 2 years ago, first game of the season's at Illinois. That's a team we should beat, and Bielema was in his first game there. Well, Bielema's Illinois team, nothing impressive. They just didn't really screw up. They let us screw up. They let us drop punts. Yeah, we get the big interception on them, and it gets called back because we have 30 yards of penalties on one play, hitting a quarterback high and then taunting them. You can't do those things. And good teams and good coaching staffs don't allow their teams to do that stuff. So I expect a more disciplined team on day one than we had the last 5 years. That's part of the coaching change. That's kind of, in some regard, I mean, kind of the adult in the room thing that you referenced. I mean, we need to be able to go in games and feel like we might be able to beat a team that is more talented than us because we're going to outcoach them. We're going to do the things that takes to win. It's not all about talent, because we've lost to a lot of teams that were more talented to the last 5 years. Play good football, and that can start on day one. And we don't have to have the full playbook in and everything yet on game one. Let's start with playing good football, good sound football, lining up under center at times, getting into a huddle. When Satterfield said that was more enticing to me than the fullback thing.
Okay. Why so?
The huddle, I've said this the last few years on the show, where I'm like, the huddle is a chance. Whenever we have communication errors, hey, we jumped off sides, and we're moving too fast, even though we're not really in tempo, we're still moving too fast. We get 10 yards on a play, but it gets called back because we have an illegal formation and a receiver is covered up by another receiver. When all those things would happen, it was like, slow down, get into a huddle for a second, just talk to each other for 1 second, and Osborne, I remember listening to him talking about the signs on the sideline. And this is before Frost got hired here, but he was talking about it, and he hated it then. He just said, I don't like, he's like, I don't get it. You get up to the line of scrimmage, you stop, you turn to the side and all that. Now, we did it because that's what Frost was doing at Oregon. And I was supportive of it because what other option do I have? But
everyone's doing it.
Everyone's doing it, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, getting into a huddle and just calling a play and lining up doesn't slow you down. Osborne would always line up in a huddle, and we were traditionally at the line of scrimmage between 20 and 25 seconds. And in fact, we'd only line up about 3 yards off the line of scrimmage for the huddle because Osborne wanted the team to break huddle and turn around and be right there. I mean, everything was so intentional.
Right.
And at the very least, cut out the intangibles, the things that can screw you up. If you're having a communication error, that's on you. You got to figure out a way not to have that. So when I think of errors, when I talk about a team being sloppy, I think of the Oklahoma game. I'm a broken record, but Oklahoma 2 years ago, we have 2 pre-snap penalties before we even snap it for the first time to Martinez. I think of Northwestern in 2020, the COVID year out there. In the first half, we have 5 offensive line penalties on 5 different offensive linemen. And if you remember, we're marching right down the field on Northwestern. Yeah. I mean, it's like cutting through butter. But we'd get 10 yards and have to come back 15. And we'd get 10 more yards and we'd have to come back 5. And you could never get out of your own way. How do we get out of our own way? That's what Rule is tasked with. I think we're going to be more physical. That's absolutely an approach that Trev said from day one. So there's your trenches. Let's get more physical. Let's make less mistakes. So let's be more disciplined. We were more disciplined on the line last year under Raiola's coaching, for what it's worth. I know it didn't always show up in the X's and O's, and we can talk about alignment of how did Raiola and Whipple mesh. That's one thing, but probably not, right?
Yeah, dude. I mean, let me ask you this: do you get the impression, because you look back at this way he built Baylor, during that 2017 year, it's well documented. He had one guy left in his recruiting class, and there was no NIL and no portal. Mm-hmm. I mean, he had to go out the old-fashioned way, and he in a span of like 6 weeks, he put together a 25 plus recruiting class. But I get the strong impression that, and I'll go back one step further. I think I tweeted this out yesterday. One of my concerns was coming in was how is he going to utilize the portal and NIL to build this development program that he wants, that Trev wants, that Husker Nation wants to see, but how is he going to kind of marry that with the fact he's got assets now with the portal and NIL he didn't have before. And I was a little bit worried about it because I thought, he's going to build this way. He's known how he built it in the past, like going the traditional way of just high school kids, but he hasn't. I mean, I think we're up to 9 or 10 transfers now, and you can see he's getting guys to play now, and they have two years left. And to me, it tells me that, to your point, he wants to win. I think every coach wants to win, right? But he wants to win now. And I think he knows he's very in tune with Husker fans, and he knows the pain of the last 5 years, even going back to the Rileys. He knows that, and he knows that he wants to build it right. At the same time, he's going to need to still inspire some hope and be able to show, I think sooner than later, that there is definitely his plan is going to work. And he's not going to take Husker Nation for granted, and you can tell that in the way he talks, and he gets that part of it. And I think some of that maybe is why he's getting guys that are going to play. Maybe it's the need. He just needs guys because we have holes. But I think part of it too is that he realizes that to your race to 6, I think that's important. I think that's really important for him. And I don't think he talked about this before. I don't think he was like, okay, one game or winning one game was great at Baylor in 2017. Obviously, he knew he wanted to win more games than that. But that's not going to work next year. If we win one game next year, I mean, I guarantee you there's going to be people going, I didn't sign up for this. Like I've dealt with 7 years of this. So yeah, that's what I like about he gets it. He hasn't been here for more than 2 months, but he knows everything about what we've been through, even when he wasn't here. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's what's unique about Rules. He absorbs all that energy, both that the angst and the frustration, and then the excitement for next year. He seems to have a really unique ability to tap into that right away.
Yeah,
and
he's
I
definitely
think that's unique.
He's the son of a preacher man. I mean, he understands how to work a crowd and talk to a crowd, but also, he is a fan and a former player of blue blood. I'm going to call Penn State one of the blue bloods of football, or certainly right up there. And he understands a fan base and a passionate fan base that, there are some things that this fan base has just gone through now for 5, 6, 7 years, and you need to show some tangible progress on the win-loss column, not just getting the big recruit or whatever, because we've had that all along the way. We've had big recruits and big off-season moments, but you got to win some games. I've and you mentioned some of the early with Temple and Baylor. These are different scenarios. Obviously, anyone can look at those two, especially Baylor, what he took over. I mean, there were off the field scenarios that affected things. He did only keep one player in that one recruiting class before they went out and got their other guys. But that one guy they got turned out to be an All-American for him. So it was part of, maybe this starts to get into how do you blend being a developmental program with also having some real win now situations. And I think one way that you do it, one way that they can do it is what's happening right now. This is such an important part of the season, is that you need to have your guys on campus now. We just saw the first weight room tweet that came out tonight. Those guys, if they're not in that weight room right now, it's really hard for me seeing them being a major contributor when we get to the Minnesota game in August. We need guys that are going to be here during the course of the offseason, going through spring or going through all the summer conditioning, or winter conditioning, going through spring ball. This is no knock, and I mean this sincerely. We've had his mom on the show, but like O'Shawn, we had him. He was a great player, the top guy out of the portal, but he doesn't get here till July. And that has to affect some of the development of a guy.
Absolutely.
And not to mention, we could talk about whether we used him right early in the season. That's a whole different thing, but just get guys here now. And that gives you a chance, I think, to develop them. And so I'm every bit as excited that we got, who's the guy that, MJ Sherman.
MJ Sherman.
I'm excited that we got him, right? I'm more excited that he's going to be here now, and he's going to be here over the course of the offseason. And then let's see what happens when we get to spring ball. Do we change up a little? Does Rule change up a little bit of how we practice? He talked about he loves the Oklahoma drill. That's his top thing. And Trev has gone on and on about how we got to be a more physical program. I've been beat up a little bit sometimes on social media and everything, talking about green jerseys. I think when you have a quarterback competition and you're in situations like scrimmage situations, I think you take a jersey off and you let those guys hit. If you have a clear-cut number one guy that doesn't need to take the hits, I don't give meaningless hits to someone. But I also don't think we're in a position right now, as much as I like Casey, I think we should have a full-out competition. We've got 6 guys on scholarship right now, and I think every one of those guys, you give them an opportunity to earn it. And I've used this analogy several times on the show, but I've gone to coaches clinics from Solich all the way to the Frost era. And that practice I went to in 2005, was it 2005 or 4, whatever it was. It was after the 2000. It was after the first season of Callahan. So we have our first losing season. Daly's the starting quarterback. We get to the next spring ball. Daly's the starting quarterback, and there's this backup guy, Zach Taylor. And we get to a Saturday practice, and it's us coaches, these high school coaches, and we were coaching youth football, middle school age kids. Anyways, there's about 200 of us in the crowd, and we watch for a 2-hour long practice. And the quarterbacks had no green jerseys on. And Adam Carricker, Jay Moore, Lakeven Smith, Titus Adams, Stuart Bradley, those guys beat the snot out of the quarterbacks, including Zach Taylor. But he got up. He would call the next play. He'd complete a little pass. He just moved the ball. He looked like the quarterback. And over the course of 2 hours, they went from having Joe Daly was the clear starter at the beginning of it, and by the end of it, it was Zach Taylor. You can't learn that about a guy playing touch football. You just can't. And so I don't doubt Casey Thompson. By the way, I feel better about Casey Thompson coming in, and I know the injuries. I mean, I just wanted to get healthy, number one, but I feel better about Casey Thompson right now than I did about Joe Daly at any point at that time. So I like Casey Thompson, but I also want to see Sims out there. I want to see Torres. I want to see Purdy and Harburg and Smothers. And I want to see those guys battling for a spot. Because what I really like about this staff right now, they haven't run people off needlessly. Let them go. We've got 96 guys or something right now. That's awesome. Cool. Let them compete. Yeah. Stay here as long as you can during this offseason. Observe every guy during the conditioning. Observe them during spring ball. And then we'll have the next round of guys leave after that. But that's after our coaches have had a chance to evaluate them. There's some development.
Yeah, I like their approach. I like the fact they have a huge roster right now, because things are gonna change for them pretty quickly here in terms of strength and conditioning. We've already heard some whispers that things are different, in the weight room, and I don't want to get into oh my God, they're lifting more weights or anything like that, but there's a different attitude, and I think it was the cornersback coach, Ethan or Evan Cooper. Sorry.
Cooper?
Yeah, he made the joke you guys get nice Rule, and you guys haven't seen what we deal with. I mean, Rule by all accounts is he's intense, and he knows he's going to weed guys out. Their guys are going to leave the program, and that's okay. You brought up Zach Taylor. And it's a great example. I think the coach that Rule is most like is Callahan, from his organization to his absolute commitment to recruiting. And Callahan obviously developed what became Huddle later on, but his ability to take what he learned from the Raiders in the professional NFL model to evaluate talent was phenomenal. I mean, you look at the talent he brought in and acquired. I call it talent acquisition. And you look at this class that Rule is building right now. I think he's up to 33, maybe 34, with more to add. This is going to rival Callahan's first class as far as numbers go. And so you look at this similar path that he's doing in this complete strategy of recruiting and the way they're building this thing. And I think that maybe we'll see how it plays out, but I think that the approach is going to be similar with how Callahan as far as the practice goes and things like that. It's going to be tough. It's going to be physical. And I think guys are going to leave. And there's gonna be guys who were like, "Oh, not that guy! Oh my gosh, not him!" But you know what? That's okay. This is the process. JD Pinkel, if you watched the video from him from On3, he made the comment. He said, Nebraska fans, just sit back and enjoy the process. You may only win 4 games next year, 5 games, but I guarantee you the process is going to work. And not to get too off topic, but I thought if Callahan had another year, I thought that recruiting class that he had lined up and what he was doing, his failure was obviously as defensive coordinator, but his program and the way he grinded is what you need at Nebraska. I mean, Callahan, and we haven't had a coach grind like we do with rules going back to basically Callahan, and that's what you need in Nebraska. Someone who's going to have that commitment, and we'll see how it plays out. But I agree.
I would say, like, Callahan, you go back to 07, the 2 knocks I would give on him was defensively, and we can blame Cosgrove there, or we can, at the end of the day, Callahan's the head coach, so he's responsible for the defense. But whatever was going on defensively, I don't know if it was ever going to get better from a development standpoint. It seemed like it required Bo coming in and Dobson coming in to get Dillard to lose 40 pounds because they had him at 275 playing some weird middle guard.
Nose tackle,
and Sue was overweight. He was watched that Colorado game. So it took a change. And this is interesting because it's kind of where we're at right now, a different mindset with new coaches doing something different. But the other thing that Callahan did was, I think maybe he chased some stars sometimes. And when I think of Joe Gantz versus Sam Keller, there's no reason Keller ever should have been playing. Yeah.
This is my Sam Keller framed autograph. That's the only autograph I have is Sam Keller. But I agree. I'm just joking. That is Sam Keller, by the way, though.
Yeah, and that's what I'd want to see when I say that there's 6 quarterbacks on roster right now. I don't have a rooting interest, to be honest with you, in any one of them. I don't really care who it is. I want them to compete, and I want to. And there's going to be a starter. That's the only guarantee I'll give you against Minnesota. There's going to be a starter, and whether it's Thompson or Sims, 2 guys that make a lot of sense. I mean, whenever have we had 2 Power 5 starting quarterbacks on the roster? And I mean, I'm talking starting quarterbacks with significant starting experience. We have that right now, and yet I don't want to give anything to either one of those. Smothers deserves that shot. I want Harburg into it. I want Purdy into it. I want Torres into it. And let's work our way out. Let's work our way through the spring. And then to your point, after spring is done, I don't expect us to have 6 scholarship quarterbacks, in the summer and when we go to Minnesota. I don't expect that then, but I want the process to play itself out, and let's see what happens. That's what I want. And, when we talk about when Callahan was gone and then they replaced him with Bo, and it was a whole new staff and new strength and conditioning, and they viewed guys differently. I remember Dobson talking about the defensive backs, that they were stiff and they spent all offseason working on their hips and everything. That got me thinking about right now with Campbell and the new strength coach and kinesiology. And I mean, I don't want to try to come off as some expert talking about kinesiology yet, but I mean, we're talking more about flexibility. It would be interesting what some new eyes and a new strength and conditioning approach to maybe a guy like Benhart would be. A lot of fans,
Sure.
I think, have tossed him aside. Benhart's, done. He's been here for 4 years and blah, 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 hasn't played. Well, what if he's one of those guys that next year comes out and he looks 20 pounds lighter? He's got some more bend in him from a development standpoint. Go back to being a developmental program. And what if he starts to match his recruiting hype, his 4-star All-American top 100 recruiting hype? What if he matches that? And it took Rule coming in here to get that out of him. I mean, that's the thing, Ndamukong Suh never would have been Ndamukong Suh the way we know him if it wasn't for Bo Pelini, because he was not on that path.
Correct.
It took
Carl
a different approach.
Carl Pelini.
Yeah. I mean,
huge. You're right. And you can look at the players like I when we hired Tony White, a guy that had a great game against Iowa. If you'll go back and watch the Iowa game, was Javin Wright. I mean, he was everywhere with his size and
that's
length.
right.
And I thought, man, this poor guy, man, he's battled ACL injuries, shoulder injuries, scary blood clots where he almost lost his leg. And now he's out here looking like what we thought Javin Wright's going to look like. And now you fast forward to the, Tony White's, defense. Does a guy like him become, to your point, does he become the Eric Hag or the Prince Mukamara that the talent was always there, but now it's being unlocked in a role that
Mhm.
you know, that can play his full potential. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of pieces there. It's going to be interesting to see how they piece them together and make it work.
Some of the pieces are changing even up to this moment. Wide receiver a week or two ago looked very different
Totally
where
different.
to your point, you can't just develop things. Sometimes you need some players too, right? And
Correct.
starting a couple weeks ago, getting a guy like Billy Kemp from Virginia, who's the number 4 all-time leading receiver from that school, to have him come in here and hopefully, maybe be. I don't know if he'll have the same production that a Palmer or Torrey had as a transfer the last 2 years, but if he's anywhere in that conversation, that's a good talking point. But then Xavier Betts, and then a guy that you talked about quite a bit last offseason, and you had high
my
hopes for
guy.
Isaiah
Yeah.
Garcia Castaneda. That came out of absolutely
Nowhere.
And
But
that's
more
impressive
importantly,
on Rule's part there that he hasn't just given up on somebody.
well, that's the most impressive thing to me. I mean, those guys are talented. Obviously, Betts, if he gets his stuff together, it's going to be a tough semester for him as far as
Mhm.
the academics go. But if he can get his stuff together, and he's going to be in an environment now where I think he's going to thrive. And I think the number one job of a leader, whether it's in business, whether it's any profession, whether it's a coach, is to provide the environment where you can do your best work. And I think the environment now for Betts is going to be the best it possibly can be. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But you have now a guy in Rule who says, "I want you back, Betts. I don't want you to get on a plane to
Mhm.
Pittsburgh. You're going to come here and play for me." You know, Castaneda or IGC. You guys, he quit in October. I mean, think about it, like what coach would be like, "Yeah, come back to the team." He's like, "Hey, I want you back. Things happened. Put that behind us. You've got talent."
Mhm.
I don't know what the conversation was, but the point is that he wanted those guys back, and I find that interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
we'll see how it works out, but it shows you, it gives you a picture into who Rule is, right,
Mhm.
and how he operates, and the way that we might think we'd operate. Oh, that guy, I'm not bringing him back. He quit on us.
Mhm.
Bets we gave him 15 chances. We busted our butt to get him into UNL, and this is how he repays us. But Rule's got a different approach, and I like that. I like the fact that he's willing to give guys second chances. He's willing to look past whatever happened and give guys a chance. Now he's gonna be tough on them, and he's gonna hold them
Mhm.
accountable as you would want. Um, but I like that he wants these guys back there. And to your point, to your first point, I mean, the room's totally different now. I mean, before a week and a half ago, we're like, man, I don't know, Lante Brown. He had some good catches last year, but who's gonna? I mean, Marcus Washington's your number one receiver. Like, I like him for sure, but you're like, man, this is not a good picture. And now all of a sudden, it's wow, that room has got some real potential now, and
Mhm.
they might even add more to it here with a receiver coming in for a visit in Bell, a 4-star on Saturday. So they're
Mhm.
not done yet. So I like that part. And in Kemp, he's a veteran guy, so you bring a veteran presence into that room that misses Trey Palmer, who leaves now. So you need to have a leader in that room, and you have Kemp, you have Fleeks from Baylor
Mhm.
as well. So yeah, it changed pretty quickly, didn't it?
Well,
From a week ago.
and at 96 guys on the roster, some of the guys we just mentioned, who knows? We're going to have to get down to 85 just like every other school. So that means there's
Well,
at
not I
least
would not exactly. I mean, let's keep in mind this is one of the advantages that he's going to have with NIL here at Nebraska is you're going to be able to move guys like they moved guys last year to NIL scholarships. They're going to be
yeah,
off the 85. So he's got that flexibility now that he's going to be able to. So not to delay, beat up your
mm.
point, but I think he's got flexibility as far as the 85 number goes.
There might be possibilities depending on how NIL works for some guys to not be on a scholarship. I suppose that gets into a whole area that I'm
Sure.
still
Yeah. Trying to
not
figure it out. Yeah.
100% aware of. I know that we're going to lose some guys over the course of this too. And to your earlier point, that's important. That's an important part of the process.
It's
What
growth.
I like
Yep.
is even if it's someone that we just talked about, someone that we're excited is back. Let's just say Betts as an example. Hey, we're excited he's back. Well, if he goes through the process and it doesn't work for him, and I'm not saying it wouldn't, but if it didn't, then that's still part of the process. I want Rule to I'd rather him have more guys to look at right now, more guys to go through the development process. You're going to weed some guys out. Some guys are going to, shine that we never thought they would before. That happens a lot of times with these coaching changes. I think of Corey Ross when Callahan's staff came on board. Corey Ross all of a sudden became a starter, and he probably wouldn't have been doing much beforehand, right? And there's always examples like that. So new staffs bring new staffs bring new eyes, bring new strength and conditioning approaches, all those things. That excites me. Now, if I'd be remiss, I have got the biased realist, the Husker realist on the forum. I'd be remiss not to just ask the question. So I'm rose colored. I'm feeling good, but bring me back down here. What are some of the biggest challenges you see? What are the things, if we can't, the race to 6, but we don't get there? What are the things, the potholes you see in the way that maybe would prevent us, the biggest challenges we have to get to that 6 and more wins?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the staff, when he was assembling the staff, we thought he's got to have someone with Big Ten experience, right? Someone that's been in this league before, that knows the stadiums, that knows these teams. And so there's no one on the staff that was in the Big Ten last year. And so maybe there's a little bit of an unfamiliarity with some of these teams and how just kind of the
other than Raiola.
Other than Raiola, you're right. Exactly. I forgot about Raiola. But that's a little bit, maybe we'll have to see how that plays out. I mean, that was a knock against Frost, right? They weren't from the Big Ten. They don't know how this works. They're going to get, totally overwhelmed. And they did the first year, right? So how fast can Rule and those guys overcome that, that unfamiliarity with the Big Ten is probably one area. And then probably number 2 is defensive tackle, defensive line. I think the loss of Colton Feast is a huge loss. I don't think it got enough attention that it probably deserved. And he was great for us last year. And so losing him, and we haven't added anybody other than Judy from the portal, how are we going to hold up throughout the season? And maybe we get, we do fine the first 4 or 5 games, but come November, injuries play a role. How do we get through a 12-game season with what we have right now? And again, things can change. We're in January. Maybe they add some pieces in May and so forth, and it works out. But that defensive line, it was a concern last year, and it's a concern again this year. We just don't have a ton of experience outside of 4 guys, and I'm
looking at the list. I'm looking at the list here. You've got Stephen Wynn Jr., Nash Hutmacher, Ty Robinson, Elijah Judy is the transfer from A&M. Now this list says Raquan Buckley, but he was a tight end the last that I saw, so I think he had transferred over. And then it's the incoming guys. It's Vincent Carroll Jackson, who Rob's going to have on tomorrow night. 7:00. So Redcasters be again.
Who, by the way, is a 4-star as of today. I don't know if you saw that, but he's
did they? Oh, that's
on Twitter.
Awesome.
He's a 4-star on 247. So
okay, Rob, mark that down. 4-star. Vincent on 247, but Riley Van Poppel, Cameron Leonard, those are all 4-star incoming guys.
I'm not counting them to play. Yeah, that's tough.
And I mean, this kind of goes almost to the same thing I had last offseason, where if we're in a true 3-man front, that doesn't look like great depth if you're counting those guys as 3-man D linemen. If we're in a more of a 4-man, we need 2 true defensive tackles, then that doesn't look so bad. Now we named Wynn, Hutmacher, Robinson, Judy, those freshmen, and if a walk-on can get developed over the offseason, just like Feast did a year ago, no one a year ago right now was talking about Colton Feast in the kind of light that he eventually, played in. So if we could have someone like that, I mean, that depth doesn't look so bad if we're trying to find 5-6 guys to fill 2 spots with edge guys, filling in around.
True.
But I don't know. I don't know what that defense looks like yet. We know that we have Butler's another one of those examples of a guy that went into the portal and they got him to come back. So Jamari Butler and Blaze Gunnerson, Chief Borders is the transfer from Florida on the edge. And when I think edge, I kind of think D end right now too. Kai Wallens, the junior college guy from California. MJ Sherman's a 5-star Georgia transfer who only played like about 140 snaps the last 3 years. And I've seen some negativity about that, but I would challenge anyone to look at Trey Palmer's, stats coming from LSU, and they weren't overly impressive either. A lot of times guys transfer because you're not getting the opportunity. You want a new set of coaches. So Sherman, Gunnarsson, Butler, Borders, Wallen, and then we bring in some of the new guys with Jake Applegate, then Maverick Noonan, Princewell Uman, Malin. There's some talent there on the edge as well too. So who knows?
Maybe one breaks through. Yeah, we don't.
Mm-hmm.
But just the guys that we've seen play. I mean, we can all, I think, hope that one of the new guys breaks through and has a role. But without having ever seen him play, I don't really count on any of the freshmen to make an impact until they actually do. But they don't seem to be going after a whole lot of guys. So maybe your point, they seem to be liking the way their edge is set up and how that defense is going to be run, because there are some good pieces with Gunnarsson, like you mentioned there. I'm excited for Gunnarsson. I thought he had a good end of the last year, and I think this is his third year now or fourth year in the system. Third year.
Yeah, he'd be going into at least year 3, if not 4. But think about that. Borders, Wallen, and Sherman are all non-traditional. They're definitely not high school guys. They're either JUCO or they're transfers. Yep. And those are 3 guys getting infused right into that spot and being here for the offseason. And again, that's the whole part. And no matter what, your initial point of, if we're not going to be good, it's going to start up there. And this is what, Trev said when he fired Frost. We need to be physical. We need to be winning the trenches. If all those names I just said, if they're great and we're awesome next year, we're going to have a pretty good team and we're going to win some games. If those guys struggle, if we don't have the depth, if guys get hurt, the series of things, then that's probably you're going to point to that area as the reason why we didn't get the race to 6, or we didn't get whatever that goal was that we were wanting. It would be probably start right up front there.
So you see the same thing as far as your concerns go, the defensive line of the year?
When you think about where they've gone to add, at least partially where they've gone to add immediate depth out of the portal, you see it there on the edge with Sherman, Wallen, and Borders. I'm calling Wallen a transfer, even though he's JUCO. Judy, that's a transfer. Then you go on to the offensive line, and Ben Scott is a huge incoming transfer. Obviously, we thought we had that with Walter Rouse, and then he had the 72-hour flu bug, and he's down in Oklahoma now. But still, they went into the portal to bring in a center next year who's going to be, by all accounts, should be a day one player.
Plug and play, yeah.
And think about the O-line. If we're also not successful for some reason next year, you would point to that offensive side along the line. And I would say that, we played our best offensive line game last year against Iowa in week 12. And right now, I can see 3 guys on this line that are better than probably anybody we had on the line that day. A healthy Prohaska, Ben Scott coming in here, and then Nuuli. And when I had Zaska on last year before the season started, he made some reference where he basically said there were 2 guys he thought that were on our team that could play anywhere. They could play for Georgia. And he said Zaska, and then he said Nuuli. And the day that we interviewed, it was right after, just a couple days after Nuuli was suspended for the season. So he kind of, Zaska's deep voice was like, oh, it's a shame that, that happened, because he thought that highly of him. And I wasn't expecting Nuuli to be a name coming out of his mouth about being that good of a player, but it was the point that was that big of a loss. To get him back, to hopefully have a healthy Prohaska here, to have Ben Scott, that's a good starting point. And then we got to develop the Benharts. We got to develop Corcoran. We've got to develop Piper. I like Lutovsky. I mean, there's a lot of good pieces. And they have a coach now that's worked with them for a year, and they get a chance to work with them again.
You have a coach and you have a head coach who's committed to that, making sure it's going to work properly. And you've got better synergy now with the offense to the offensive line. And we heard last year some of the rumblings about the Raiola and Whipple, and just wasn't the marriage we were going to be successful with. I mean, it just wasn't going to happen. We wanted it to be, but it didn't really ever mesh up. But now you've got this head coach who's going to make sure the offense and the offensive line have the same mission, and they're going to have a much more easier of a marriage than you did last year. And so, second year with offensive line coach, that definitely helps as well. You have the same voice. Those guys all got on the table and vouched for Raiola. Even the guys who left, like Banks, they wanted to say this is the guy. And so he's got a 1-year contract, and he's got an opportunity to come in and show that, he can do it.
Last off season, Frost said something very similar to what Rule said, but in kind of typical Rule fashion, he explains it a little better and goes in a little more in depth than Frost would. But a year ago, Frost talked about he loved the style, the approach that that Raiola brought, and that's why I hired him. I hired him because he coaches the style of O-line that I wanted, but never really went in depth, and maybe wasn't ever asked that. But in my mind, from an X's and O's standpoint, and the things that I'm curious about, I'm like, well, what does that mean? Well, then Rule sticks around here, keeps Raiola, and immediately the Twitter sphere is, oh, you're just trying to get his nephew or whatever. Why in the world are we keeping this guy? But then when he had the opportunity in a press conference, gets asked, why'd you keep Raiola? He went right back to the same thing. He coaches the style that I like coached. Well, what does that mean? And it was I think the World Herald did a article. They broke down the 3 different styles of blocking, and it was flat back, and it was zone blocking, and there was one other kind. But the point that Rule made was there's one right or wrong style. There's not. It's just that whatever style it is that you want to do, you really don't want to hire someone that doesn't want to do that style. It just doesn't. That part doesn't fit. So if you're a flat back guy, which is what Raiola is, and firing off and driving guys and taking them down, then you don't want to hire a zone guy. You just don't want to. Not that zone blocking is bad. You want to get someone that aligns with the style you want. And that sounds like that's what Frost wanted to do. Frost gets fired. We don't know that that's what Whipple wants to do. We can see friction between Whipple and Raiola, and then now we have Rule in here, and Rule sitting there going, no, this is what I want to do. I want to.
So on that point, I'll take it one step further. Satterfield's press conference, he sounded just like Frost. If you listen to his press conference, he was like, this guy, I spoke to him for half an hour, and he got excited just talking about Raiola. He's like, I love this guy. This is the way I want to play. And I was like, this sounds like the same thing that Frost said. So you piece these things together. You piece what Rule said, and about how the players all got on a table and were like, this is the guy we want. I mean, and it's interesting. I don't know how it's going to work out. I mean, I hope it works out obviously well for us. But you've got a fired head coach in Frost, and you've got a new head coach in Rule, a new offensive coordinator, and they're all saying the exact same thing about Raiola that his players are saying. And then also his mentor at Notre Dame, Harry Heinstein, said the same thing. I mean, so we'll see. But there's a lot of guys that are getting on a table and saying this guy's the real deal. So
and there is a message. There's a connection of message that you're hearing when you listen to Satterfield. Didn't you kind of think, oh my God, I'm hearing Rule? Because it sounded, there were so many similarities with what Rule said. Yeah. But when I listened to Rule, I was like, gosh, am I listening to Trev? Because there's things that he's saying that I swear Trev just said 3 months ago when he fired Frost. And what it makes me think of was Hill Varsity Radio about a week or so back. It was Chris Schmidt. Schmitty had Mitch Sherman on. And he just asked Sherman, and it was right after they kind of announced the McGuire as a wide receivers coach, and there were some fans that were like, oh my God, we're hiring a kid in his diapers still. And it's like, take a step back. And he asked Sherman, what do you think of this staff? And Sherman's answer was, I think it's functional. And then he stops because he's like, I know that doesn't sound sexy. I don't mean this as I don't mean this in a negative way towards the staff at all. I think it's functional. And what's the opposite of functional? Dysfunctional. And how many times over the years at Nebraska, whether it's assistant coach to head coach or coordinator, or maybe it's an athletic director, or maybe it's you go all the way back to Harvey Perlman and Bo yelling at, having public spats after the A&M game in 2010, we just would have different dysfunctions at different levels of leadership or coaching. And to have what we have right now, which is perfect function. I mean, what Trev said he wanted when he fired Frost, it absolutely looks like he hired the guy that is exactly what he wanted. He wanted a guy that's going to, focus his attention in here in the trenches. We're going to be physical. He's going to have a style here. He's going to have an approach. You hire Rule in here. Rule comes in, says the exact same things, and then goes a step further and does some of the almost Devaney-esque kind of uplifting him. I mean, really, it's a preacher's son thing. He's going out to a fan base that's been beaten down and making them feel good. And that's, you go back into any history thing. Watch what Devaney did before he ever got to Nebraska. He went around the state to every single county, talked in every single VFW club and whatever, and just talked to Husker fans back in 1961 after 20 seasons of a lot of losing seasons, and just started getting people excited. And it was uplifting. It was positive. And then he backed it up in year one by doing something that nobody ever thought he'd do, which was win 9 games after a whole bunch of 3 and 4 win seasons. Devaney picked a first game on the season. It was the second game. It was at Michigan. It wasn't a very good Michigan team. And he goes, I think we can beat these guys, and let's focus on this game. This game would be a one that would really, it could change the course. It could give people, confidence both on the team and fans. To your point, that Minnesota game, I don't want to put everything on one game, but imagine a victory there in week 1. What kind of confidence would that do to the team? What kind of confidence would that do to the fan base?
Yeah.
That's experienced the types of losses that we've had. We need some positive things happening, and we're seeing them right now, but this is also the time of the year where, positive things get met with a lot of fair skepticism, because we've seen positive things happen this time of the year. And at the end of the day, it's all going to come down to the wins and losses, and rules no different there.
So quick thing, you mentioned Mitch Sherman and talking about the functional team and kind of what Trev wanted. So I go back to last spring or last summer, and I was buying into the Whipple experiment. The Raiola I thought was going to work out, but there was a podcast that Terry Pettit, the former volleyball coach, he has his own podcast. We had Trev on. It was like mid to late July, and he asked Trev what he thought a head coach should be. Basically, describe the qualities of a head coach. This is when I realized that Trev was going to fire Frost, and it was like, it was that silver bullet moment where I was like, this is not going to work, because he said, he didn't say it. A head coach to me is someone who can coach coaches. It's hard to be an assistant coach and coach players. You love to do that. You were a youth coach. You love coaching players. All coaches get into coaching profession to do that. Now, as a head coach, you have to divest yourself from that and coach coaches, and that's not easy. It's hard. So the ones that do it right are successful at that. And number 2, you have to be the chief executive of a multi-million-dollar enterprise. You have to be the CEO of that. And he said, lastly, they have to be able to get players and coaches to run through a wall for them, and that's it. Those were his 3 things. And I was like, no, and no, it's not going to work. It's not going to work out. And you talk about, to take it full circle, Rule is those 3 things. He is you can see the structure there where he's building this organization. He's building. He hired Susie Elza. He hired CJ Cabazos. I mean, he's hiring these pillars of an organization. He's building this structure. He's hiring coaches that we're like, what are you doing? But to Mitch Sherman's point, he is coaching coaches, and he is fully confident in his ability to coach and hold accountable coaches and grow them. And then you add in the third piece. We've heard several of our former players. Heck, there's 9 of them on his staff. They're still playing for this guy, still coaching with this guy. They run through a wall for him. And so I think of those 3 things Trev said to Terry. I'm like, he got exactly what he was looking for. Now it has to manifest itself out, and then we're obviously, but I think it will. But it's just kind of funny looking back on that conversation and seeing what Rule is today, and he got the guy that he wanted. And I don't think he was picturing Rule back in July, obviously, when he was talking to Terry Pettit, but he meets those 3 criteria.
It's interesting.
It's a functional organization. It's a healthy organization. You can see that in.
And that's the thing, that doing things well. We've said this for so many years on the show, and I want to burn every one of the tapes because it never came to fruition. But it was, if you do the right thing and you do the right thing long enough, good things should eventually happen. I mean, if you have a well-run organization, we shouldn't be scared to say, hey, I think we can get to 6 wins in year 1 or 7 or 8 or whatever. I don't want to put a cap on it, but don't say that because, we went 3-9 and 4-8 last. Well, this is a new staff and it's a new approach and a new way of doing it, but it has to be done right. There are no shortcuts here. That's the one thing the portal can't be a shortcut. They have to stick to, they want to be a developmental program. They still need to be one, even living in this world of NIL and the portal. And so I think there are ways that you can balance that. And again, getting guys in here now to do it are important, but you also have to find a way that's going to work for you. We can't expect, I brought up Osborne earlier, and I know Coach Rule's met with Osborne now, and I know he gives great reverence to Osborne. And we can't expect him to do things the way that Osborne did it. That's not the point of this. And there's not one way to be successful, but he has to find what works for him. And I think your point about managing and coaching coaches is really important because that's something that I think he takes great pride in. I think he takes great pride in doing things a little different than someone else's. So when he goes and brings up Joey McGuire from the Texas high school ranks back in the days of Baylor, and I'm sure there are people going, what are you doing? What are you doing? That's a high school coach. You're coaching P5 football. Well, that guy's now at Texas Tech as the head coach. His son is the next generation of young coach that he's brought up. And we'll see. I mean, Garrett, we'll find out in 5 and 10 years. He might be the next Lincoln Riley. He might be a coach that is over his head. We'll find out. Bob Wager, another Texas longtime successful high school football coach, now coaching tight ends for us. It'll be interesting, but he's taking his approach, and this is Rule's going to do it the way that he feels is going to be successful. I think as important as anything, because he's coaching up coaches, but those 2 coordinators he brought in, those are differentiators. We brought in Power 5 sitting coaches from other schools, from Syracuse and from South Carolina. We brought in guys that can take care of the X's and O's, and guys that I think that can speak in place of Rule. Certainly Satterfield can, my goodness. I mean, that they can also coach up some of the coaches too. And you saw that with Satterfield's not these are not coaches that are the head coach is really the guy running the show, and the coordinators are just sitting back there, kind of taking orders. Those guys, Satterfield had a role in whether Rayola stays or not. You can tell it. He's going to have a role in what the X's and O's are. And same thing goes there with White on defense.
I've heard Rule described this way. He is a micromanager, and he's going to be involved in every single detail of the program. He can't be everywhere, obviously, nobody can, but he has guys like Satterfield. His coaches, his staff is going to know exactly what he wants, what he expects, and they're going to be able to give that information, that intel back to him where he can't be in a staff meeting here or in a production meeting over here. But the expectation is going to be well known, and there's going to be no deviation from what he wants. And I think, too often in the past with Frost and Riley, you didn't have that. You didn't have that structure of the organization. There wasn't clear expectations of what was expected of them. And he's going to ask you. He's going to be extremely in the details in terms of what's taking place in his program. This is 100% Rule's program, and it sounds like Trev has been like, go at it, big guy. Like, get crazy. I'll be over here to, getting my life back. But it just shows you how much, there's it's funny listening to guys that played for Osborne, and there's some on the radio, but there's almost like maybe I've told you this before, it's almost like a giddiness to their stories about the interactions with Rule, and different than what we've had before. And it's interesting to kind of take note of just their quick assimilation and affinity and just buy-in, even when they wanted to be skeptical and the same things as we have been fans. But, seeing him work and seeing his grind, I think has really turned guys that were maybe like, I don't know, to what he's doing. Like us as fans, like remember last year we were like, why are we offering Zane Flores? Like, what is going on? Like, what are you not seeing, Frost and Verduzco? Everyone in this state is telling you this guy is the real deal. There's people are like, this guy is the best quarterback I've seen in years in Nebraska, and we're not offering him. It's mind blowing.
Yeah, and it was so inconsistent because they'd be on other in-state guys, and when we had Benning on last year, Benning talked about how they were working harder in Omaha and all those things, and it's like, okay, that's all great, and that was all great. And we got a bunch of in-state guys. why are you not
Yeah.
offering that kid?
And you know what? So
wasn't consistent.
Rule gets here, and one of the first thing he does is try to get Zane Flores. I mean, he tries everything. He gets a phone call from his dad. Like, he actually gets on the phone, he's thinking about going and to Zane Flores's Gretna's awards night to go show up there. And he is seriously irked and upset that a guy like Zane Flores is leaving the state of Nebraska, just like us as fans would feel. And his mission, I guarantee he told his coaches, this will never happen again. We weren't here when this happened, but a player like him will never leave the state again. Not going to happen. So basically telling all you guys, watch this, see what happened. We weren't here, but know this occurred on our soil, and it's a shame it happened. And it kills him that Zane Flores is going to Oklahoma State.
And
that's what I want. I want a coach like that, because that's how I felt. That's how you felt. And it fires me up.
And we don't get that one kid, and that one individual instance that's painful. We don't get him, but it was still the value of him reaching out still has value. That's still
huge.
Those coaches know that now. That pays dividends down the road. For what it's worth, it's not the first time we've ever seen a guy transfer. So if there was ever futures, who knows? The point is, what do you tell your kids, or what do you tell anyone when you're mentoring them at work? Don't burn bridges, and you keep your relationships. And he's certainly, I think, he appreciates that. As we start to wind this talk down, I think about something. I put it on your graphic here. I call it the hardest working fan on Husker Twitter, kind of almost the James Brown hardest working man in rock and roll there. But you're the hardest working man on Husker Twitter, and that's Grinder, right? I mean, if you listen to every podcast, you read everything. I mean, anyone seriously, fan formers and redcasters. If you're on Twitter and you're not following Jim, follow him at HuskersMN. The amount of time and effort, it boggles my mind sometimes, because you hear everything, you see everything, you read everything. And one of the things I think is interesting about how Trev brought Rule in is that, as painful as the 75 days were that we didn't have a head coach, at least we had Mickey in the interim, but we didn't have the head coach. But I never was worried that Trev wasn't handling it right. This wasn't a 40-day search under Peterson, where we were sending planes to Arkansas and they're coming back empty. Nothing like that. He handled it the right way. But as painful as those 75 days were, if you did it right, it actually gives you one of the most unbelievable opportunities that very rarely ever get handed to an athletic director. He had 75 days to reflect, look at what he really wants, ask the hard questions, talk to a lot of people. I mean, when do ADs get that chance? So many times coaches are fired and hired so quickly, such quick turnarounds. And here he has a chance just over the course of a couple of months to just talk over coffee with this Matt Rule guy and just become buddies and become, and learn about each other, to the point where it became a thing where I don't care what the obstacle is. I'm not going to lose this guy. We're going to get this guy. And he got him. So, I mean, it may work out gloriously. It may not work out, but I think Trev couldn't be any more ecstatic with who he got out of this.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, just put yourself in Trev's shoes. I mean, imagine if you or I had to fire a coach and hire the replacement with, every news outlet want to know what's going on, and do it in a span of a week. And that's what most ADs have to do. He got to be able to sit back, like you said, and vet every single candidate, take his time, watch their press conferences, how they handle the media, where they worked before, who knows them, all that stuff. And he arrived at probably, I'm guessing, 2 or 3 guys, and he got the guy. I always say this too, because I always say I wanted Fickle. I like the idea of Fickle. I love the hire of Rule, but I think we got the coach that we needed in Rule for our situation, and Wisconsin got the coach that they needed for their purposes. And I think would I have liked Fickle? Yes, absolutely. But I think Rule is a much, much better coach for our situation, having been through his experiences he's been through, having failed in the NFL. Which I think is, Trev mentioned that he wanted a guy that had failed too. So he's had success and he's failed. Fickle hasn't failed yet. And so
Yeah.
I think I'm really excited about him being the guy, like you said, and arriving at that solution and that final solution that this was the guy to lead this program. And
Yeah.
I'm excited.
Well, we all know that coaches that failed at the pros have no chance of, bringing, having a second life in college, Nick Saban or Pete Carroll. But, that's beyond the point. So, he's had an interesting career. He's definitely a college guy, I think, if nothing else, that came out of that. And he is that grinder. He's the Rob has the text that's going across the bottom. The hardest working man in show business was James Brown, not hardest working man in rock and roll.
Yes.
Thought about that the second I said that, but regardless, he wanted to find a grinder. I think he found one. I think he's finding a staff that's gonna match that too. Well,
so I have a question for you before you go. Have you been confused yet for Matt Rule in the streets of Lincoln?
So
have we got any questions from kids asking their mom and is that Coach Rule?
I went to the opening press day that when they introduced him, and when I walked over when I walked across campus to the East Stadium, about 4 or 5 different people said something to me. Now I think 2 or 3 of them recognized me from the show, so they're almost joking. Then one guy had no idea who I could tell he had no idea what the Redcast was, but he looked at me and like, "Are you Coach Rule?" And I'm like, "Come on, it's not that close." Like, I get it, I get some similarities, but I'm not like, it shouldn't. Someone shouldn't look at me and like seriously think like, "Oh my God," like it's not that close. In fact, I think it's JP on like it must be somebody that's on like a guy that's on radio and he's on Twitter. He looks a lot more like Rule than I do. And somebody pointed that out. And I was like, yeah, I think that guy has a little more of the facial things. But anyways, I get it. And I'll play with it, have fun with it. The doppelganger, official doppelganger of the program. But anyways, that's where we're at with that. So, well, we're getting to the very end of it here. Jim, as we always do on the Redcast and on the forum, I want to allow you, the guest, to have the parting shot and kind of take us out of here. Tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, no, I'm always excited about what you guys are doing. I love the Go Big Redcast. You guys have the best podcast. And for those who are listening, support these guys. Listen to their shows. You guys do a phenomenal job. And I love the fact that you guys are there. Thick and thin. You've had some down years, but you guys keep coming back with great shows. So looking forward to tomorrow night's show with Vincent Carroll Jackson. Great story. Played, I think, only 8 or 9 games his senior year, and a lot of raw talent. I'm looking forward to hearing his story. So thanks for having me. I appreciate what you guys are doing. Go Big Red.
Well, absolutely. Well, as you mentioned. Next week or tomorrow night, we will have Vincent Carroll Jackson on, defensive lineman. Next week, we will have Chaz and SoCal on. I have just a slew of other shows that are going to be planned. Got some former Huskers, some big things in the works over the course of the offseason, some big ideas. And then we're going to sprinkle in some Redcasts as well throughout. And we might even do some things a little differently with the regular Redcast. We've talked about maybe going back and doing just some audio format only and not have the whole show out there on YouTube. Some things are built more for YouTube and not others. So maybe we do an audio only podcast, but if we have a couple of good segments out of it, we'll pull those out, post those to our YouTube channel as well. So we're playing around. This is the off season where we're going to try to get better too. And it's a lot of fun, but thank you so much, Jim. It's always good having you on. Like you said, I think this is your 4th or 5th time, and it won't be your last because we love talking with Husker fans like you. But I guess when it comes down to that, remember this, Redcasters, maybe you could be the next one to join us on the forum.
A Herd at Sports Network production.